All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's up, man? How you doing?
Chilling as per usual. By yourself.
This will be released on Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And
Happy Turkey Day, everybody.
Happy Turkey Day, or Ham Day if you're a degenerate.
Or day where we wrecked the indigenous peoples of North America Day.
You know, it's funny. We were planning on doing an episode on like the real history of Thanksgiving, and we ended up not doing it.
We just didn't.
And we were talking about it for weeks. We were like, hey, on Thanksgiving, we're going to release an episode, so why not just do it on like the real history of Thanksgiving? And we totally botched that and are not going to talk about it whatsoever.
Nope. Google it, though. It's super interesting.
It is very interesting. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that I'm tired as hell, and I'll tell you what. So,
well, I'll tell you what.
I'll tell you what. For people who want to live in New York City, take in mind how terrible a New York City commute is. Over the past 5 days, past 6-7 days, this has been an ongoing problem, but it's intensified in the month of November. There has been the worst subway traffic of all time. Just the worst subway traffic of all time.
I'd agree with that. How many times do you have to switch on subways?
I have to switch all the time. And today I was going from downtown all the way uptown. And where I live, and if you want to zone out and, make a list of, the streets I may live off of to kill me, then this is the time to take notes. I don't live next to an express stop in New York, so I have to transfer from an express to a local. And first of all, when I'm in subway, the first express train I took was just in brutal train traffic. A normal 25-minute commute turned into about 47 minutes or so. I would say nice 47 minutes. And
that's rough.
One of those painful commutes where it's just like boom, boom, just moving like a slug. Yeah, like just slugging it along the train tracks.
And it always like jerks really hard. Like, I don't know if you get this, but like I got my arm up, and usually because I'm taller, like I'll stand farther away so people can stand, in between or whatever when it's like super crowded. And just when you get that jerk, it like pulls on my back in a way that's like super uncomfortable. And then you're standing literally for like 45 minutes straight, like just trying to keep yourself vertical. It's rough, man.
It's a rough
First world
life.
Problems, man.
First world problems. And the New York City subway is terrible. And then I finally get to where I transfer over to the local train, and then the local train skips my stop, ends up all the way up in Harlem, and I'm just livid and just with the atrocities that we speak about, nothing gets me more angry than being stuck in a subway for more than 2 minutes than I have to be. Right. Like if I'm delayed for 2 minutes, like I'm just fuming inside. And everyone else, if you look at everyone's face in a subway, if they're stuck for more than 2 minutes, their faces just turn sour. Like nobody's happy. And every single time you're in a train that's stuck, there's always the most aggressive panhandler at the same time.
There's this one panhandler on the L into Brooklyn that I hear all the time, and he's a character, man. This dude is rude and rough, but I love listening to him because he's always like really specific about the amounts that he needs. He's like, I need $2.37 so I could get a cup of coffee. Why can't anybody help me? I just don't get it. Everybody's been rude. Everybody sucks. Fuck you. I need $2.37. And it's like, and then he does some like good ass math too. It's like, that's like 2 quarters, 7 nickels, 8 dimes, it's fucking hilarious.
It shows you that even if you get an education, sometimes you can end up in the toilet. However, there's always one. Have you ever heard, here's the craziest subway experience I've had. So one time I've been spit on in the subway by somebody who had some type of, I don't want to diagnose this person, but it seemed like he definitely had some type of schizophrenic disorder.
Okay.
it was
That's
honestly
horrifying.
kind of traumatic. If you've ever been spit on the subway. However, there was one time there was a guy, and it was late at night, and the train was halfway empty or halfway full, depending on if you're a pessimist or an optimist. And this guy is just coming to person, and he's just asking for $1 politely. So I'm just like, you know what? I never give money to people on the train. I'm going to give money to this guy. So I give him $1. And the guy sits right in front of me. He pulls out something. He starts cleaning it. I can't really tell what it is. He's cleaning something. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, did this guy just take out a crack pipe? He's cleaning it. And all of a sudden, he pulls it out, starts smoking it. It starts smelling like just chemicals and bleach, and just it just smelled like something I never smelled before in my life. I had never smelled crack before, or I don't know what the hell that he was smoking.
Sounds like meth.
In my entire life.
Yeah.
And everyone starts leaving and going into the other train cart. And they're looking at me. They're gazing at me like it was me, because I was the one who gave this guy $1, like I enabled him to smoke crack in front of everyone. I'm like, I didn't make him smoke the crack, but needless to say, that's when I stopped giving money to people on the train.
You know, Henry, that's the wonders of a voluntary society.
That's the wonders of a voluntary society.
Shout out, Mr. C.
Last time, that's the last time I've ever given money. Did you hear about the cricket woman? The woman who...
Yes, the one who released crickets on the subway in between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Hell yeah.
So I know
hilarious.
that woman.
I know
that woman
person?
personally. I know that person personally. So so there was a lady who released crickets in a train, and it was an emergency. You know, they had to pull the emergency brake on the train. It was a huge delay on the subway. This lady was a local homeless woman where I used to live. She was called the Spitting Woman. You ever hear of the Spitting Woman?
Yes, I have. This is the same person?
This is one of the most famous homeless people in New York over the past 15 to 20 years. She's a legend. And she used to live, or she used to wander right outside of my apartment. So I used to frequently run into her, And you would hear her just make these croaking sounds throughout the night, like out the night. You see her every night. You used to hear her it was like a coyote howling to the moon, and she used to spit on people who walked past her. So there was a time where she was right outside my apartment, right outside. She's spitting on all the cars. Just spitting on the cars. Don't know why. Just she's doing it. And a guy comes out and he's like, "What the fuck?" He's like, "Stop spitting on my car, you fucking bum." And he starts screaming at her. And she just gets up in his face like she starts speaking Latin backwards. But this lady made international news when she let off a bag of crickets, or a cage of crickets.
Get a bag of crickets.
I don't know. She dropped crickets in a subway, and there's shirts about her. Barstool Sports has written a lot about her. She is a legendary figure in New York City, and she'll probably be written about in multiple stories of this city. I can't imagine accounts of her not being in a book about this generation in New York. And I got to experience her in firsthand.
All right, let's stop.
I've met some famous people in my life, but I'll tell you what, this is the story that I'm going to bring down to my
your
kids.
Grandchildren.
Did you ever hear of the Spitting Lady?
Yes, Grandpa, you told us this story 8 times already.
Well, she's your mother.
No. All right. Let's stop boring our non-New York City residents who listen to this show. Let's talk a little bit of current events and then get to the real topic here.
Yeah. So happy Thanksgiving again. So we figured that since we're coming into the holiday, and probably fewer people will download this episode because it's going to be released right on Thursday, that we would just take the liberty to kind of bullshit about some stories in the news and bring some context. There was a couple of interesting ones that we saw. I guess we'll start out with. Should we start out with our main topic, or should we go through the subtopics first?
I don't know. I'll leave it up to you.
Hey guys, vote. Oh wait, this is recorded 2 days prior to the actual release.
If you're a time traveler, tweet us right now.
All right, let's just start with this. Let's start with the Uighur story, because this is the main topic, and we want to spend the majority. We already bullshitted enough. We'll get to the other stuff later. So, for you guys who don't know, that there is a minority within China that are predominantly Muslim, called the Uighurs, who live in Western China, and there has been, I guess, some leaks. Danny, you can explain this better than I have because you've been researching more.
Yep. So the TLDR is that the Chinese people have like what amounts to detention camps, where they're putting up to 1 million of these ethnic Uyghurs. They don't like them very much, and basically what they were doing is like pseudo. It's super interesting and very, very convoluted, but what they were trying to say is that China's doing this because they're trying to thwart terror, right? They're claiming the war on terror status because there have been undoubtedly, separatists, Uyghurs, who have caused some violence in China. And so in an effort to like prevent attacks, Minority Report style, they're just rounding up a ton of these Uyghurs, up to 1 million of them, and putting them into these newly built, oh man, what's the word that they actually use? Camps. I'm going to try and find the actual word. Vocational training centers, they call it. And the world has been kind of quiet about it, but for the most part, anybody who's in the know about it is really suspicious about China doing this because it sounds a lot like concentration camps, like move aside, fencing for, cages, kids in cages on the southern border. Like what China may be doing here to the Uyghurs is kind of fucked up. So there was a leaks recently. We don't know who the leaker is, but there were some documents, about 9 pages worth or so, that outline what everybody was suspecting was going on, and there's been some terrible shit. I can go into more detail a little bit later, but like I think a really good place to start is like, for most people to listen to this, nobody knows what a Uyghur is or where they come from or what's the deal there. So I figured maybe we can talk a little bit about that before we really dive in. But does that sound like a good overarching view there? Yeah,
that's a good place to start and to lead this, because most people don't really know what Uyghurs are. I mean, I myself included didn't even really know what a Uyghur was until we started doing this show. So explain who they are, and where they come from and what's their ethnic background. I think that would be pretty helpful because most people don't realize that, we've talked about this, that China is pretty diverse.
Yes, very.
It's more diverse than you think. And tell us about the Uyghurs.
Well, so the Uyghurs are a minority in China. They're Turkic in ethnic groups, though. I'm going to muddy the water a little bit later in terms of what actually a Uyghur is, because there's some question about what exactly a Uyghur constitutes, like who a Uyghur might be. But they're native to a specific region in China in the northwest called Xinjiang, or officially it's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. That's a mouthful. But they're one of China's 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities, right? So just kind of playing on that fact, did you know that China has 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities? I certainly didn't until recently. But basically, they're recognized by China only as like a regional minority, and they consider their nation a multicultural nation, and they definitely reject the idea that they're an indigenous group, right? Because if they were an indigenous group, by international law, they'd have certain protections, so they definitely they don't want to call the Uyghurs as an indigenous group. But they've been around for a really long time. So they basically, they're sedentary, like tribal people historically. So they settled in like these oases in the Taklamakan Desert in China. and that's basically comprising of what's called the Tarim Basin. That's the region where they're from. And a bunch of different civilizations have been in control of this particular region. China, obviously now, but also the Mongols, the Tibetans, and like the majority of the Turkic world. But right now we're looking at about 11 million Uyghurs that live in China and about 1 to 2 million that live outside of China. The bigger communities that live outside of China right now are mostly in those Central Asian countries, so like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, things like that. But a bunch of Uyghurs live abroad elsewhere, places like Canada, Germany, the US, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Afghanistan, all over the world, basically. But what's kind of important to talk about for this conversation is that the term Uyghur has a really expansive definition. It's not like one very specific thing, like, Polish or like, I don't know, Mexican or something like that. It's like kind of loose. And this is where the legality of what's going on in China kind of comes into play. But I'll get into that a little bit later. Basically, initially, the where these people come from, I think as far back as like 842. So it's been a really long time. They were like tribesmen of the Teal tribe. And that was in northern China, Mongolia, and the Altai Mountains. And they basically came from what was called the Uighur Khaganate, right? And this is like the ancient Uighur people. But basically, there's been a fluid definition since on where, what these Uyghurs are. And I think it basically creates this confusion about what they are. So like recently they've been doing a bunch of DNA analysis. China specifically does forced DNA tests. Like they collect DNA samples from all the Uyghurs, in part because they want to prove that they're not like an indigenous people and that they're like a bunch of different things. They're just like an ethnic minority. But what the DNA analysis shows so far is that they're mixed between like Caucasian and East Asian. And they're super interesting looking. So if you don't know what a Uyghur looks like, just like Google it. And it's a really broad base. Like they don't have one particular look. They're considered pretty exotic in China, and I'd say they look pretty exotic in general. You can get a Uyghur that's like blonde hair, and really fair skin, to like Uyghurs that are darker skinned, black hair, Uyghurs that look.
Let me
like
stop
Chinese,
you right there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You're making them sound like they're Pokemon.
I mean,
there's different styles and different versions of Uyghurs that you can find. There's some that are blonde. There's some that are more brown than others.
I think it's good context though, because the
description is just funny.
It's good context because the argument that China's trying to make, especially with not letting them be considered indigenous, so that they can put them in camps and shit like that, is that that they're not one like branch of a tree, right? They're like an amalgamation of a bunch of different peoples, and so therefore they don't have the same protections as say an indigenous group. Now, just kind of skipping ahead a little bit, I think Uyghurs, like the word, comes from a bunch of different places. I think most historians agree that the Uyghur comes from like this one conference in Tashkent in 1921, and it was attended by a bunch of like Turkic Muslims that lived in that Tarim Basin in Xinjiang, right? And they basically chose the word Uyghur kind of like as a homage to the original like ancient Uighur people, but like very distinctly separate from them. And then they've been called a bunch of other things that weren't very nice. So I know that the Chinese for a really long time had been calling them a word that I can't pronounce, but what translates to turban heads, which is fucked up. But now they just call them, in their own pronunciation, Uyghur. Now, this one dude who wrote a book on this, Return to China's Northern Frontier, he wrote that, as a matter of fact, there was for centuries no national name for these people. People identified themselves with whichever oasis they came from, like, for example, Kashgar or Turfan. And so it becomes troubling to kind of pin down what exactly a Uyghur is. And then it kind of gets really fucked up from there. I know that around the time that the Soviets were in power, they basically started backing certain Uyghur groups to, well, let's say divide up the Muslim population, right? So they would back this group over that group, so that they would keep them from banding together. I mean, we talk a lot about about this particular topic. There's a lot of echoes and parallels there. And particularly there was these two sects, right? There was like kind of the folks that came from the ancient Uyghurs, and also the Turkic Muslims who, identified themselves as Turkey or East Turkestani people. But eventually what ended up happening was that, the ruling regime in China, the Kuomintang, I can't, you know how to say that? Kuomintang. They basically called all Muslims, all Turkish people in that, Turkic people, I should say, in Xinjiang as the Hui nationality. And they just put them all together in one bucket. And for specifically that region, they called them turban-headed Hui to differentiate themselves from other like Muslims in China. So basically in 1934, Uyghur became a thing, and that's when the particular governor in that area, his name was Shang Shikai, he came to power. He adopted basic like the Soviet classification for them, which was Uyghur. Okay, I'm getting a little bit lost here. The point is that their name and like who it constitutes and what exactly is has been in flux and has been questioned for a long time. And this is basically the grounding for, China's argument that Uyghurs aren't actually a people. They're just like a loosely organized, minority group in the area of Xinjiang. And I think that's kind of important to know. But kind of finally wrapping that history of what a Uyghur is, when communists won under Mao Zedong, they also adopted, officially that term Uyghur as the name. Are you following most of that? It's kind of a fucked up storyline.
Yeah, I'm following it. So they're a group that's not recognized as a minority because they're considered
as
like
an
a loose
indigenous
people because
right.
They're considered a loose conglomerate of different ethnic groups together who are in Western China, who've been there for years, who are predominantly Muslim, and there's been a lot of like kind of favoritism by former governments to try to split up different Muslim towns or Muslim units.
That's right.
Is that kind of like a T?
Yep. That is the T. That's a really good way to put it. And I guess another really good thing to note is that it's not just the fact that they're like this indigenous group that happened to occupy a specific region, an autonomous region in China. It's that there's been a lot of tension between China and the Uyghur people. Broadly, we're going to just use the word Uyghur to describe them. So in 1912, the Qing dynasty was replaced by the Republic of China, and these pan-Turkic jihadists, they basically challenged a Chinese warlord who controlled that particular area, and they did an uprising then. So, and then again, in 1933 and 1944, they actually successfully gained independence, and they were backed by like Soviet, Joseph Stalin. And so the first they called it East Turkestan, by the way, the first East Turkestan Republic, it was super short-lived, and then that was in 1934, and then it didn't come back up again until 1944, where they made the second East Turkestan Republic. But it was basically a Soviet puppet that didn't really last long at all. That was 44 to 49. So the Uyghur people in general are not, they've been at odds with, mainland China for some time now, right? So that kind of idea of an ethnic diaspora that's Uyghur is at odds with, the grander Chinese, banner. And they've fought for independence and won twice, if not, not to just fall to China's rule again and again. And so because of this tension, because of the idea of a Uyghur nationality, of a Uyghur ethnicity, and the desire for a Uyghur state, that puts them at direct conflict with China, who, as we know, is a really regimented society. And a lot of this was happening around the time of Mao. So, like, you can imagine how fucked up it was, try to be a Uyghur and try to, like, separate from, China during Maoism.
Well, they kind of reemphasize the point that China, that is a myth that China is like some... Mainland China is just some, one ethnic group that's completely united under one national government. Like China, the entire history of within China has been a divided one, longer than a unified one. China as a unified state is as of right now, what we know it is the exception, not the the status quo. Like typically China has been divided either politically or by sectarian or by whatever political. I'll explain it this way. So before World War II or during World War II, arguably, I mean, depends when you put the starting point is. Some people who start World War II with the beginning of the Sino-Japanese War, there was a civil war going on in China between nationalist and communist. And it's kind of funny because if you look at that movement, the communists were kind of more nationalist in the nationalist group because a lot of the ethnic Chinese saw the nationalist group as just like kind of a puppet movement from the West, which is never really popular when in former colonized states. However, it's an interesting kind of look at it because I myself don't really know that much about Uyghurs at all.
Right. And this was all happening during that same time period that you're describing, right? So like there's this whole other sect of people that are also like fighting for independence and shit.
I will add a little bit of additional context and more of a contemporary context. What I've read about Uyghurs has mostly been negative. I'll be completely honest.
Yeah, I hear that.
It's either been a negative point of view in following the war in Syria because there's been a lot of Uyghur. I don't know what the degree is, but I've read about Uighur fighters within Syria,
For sure.
in ISIS and other extremist groups. Mm-hmm. But makes sense, that's kind of like where the propaganda outlets are going. They're going to former Soviet bloc states in the East as well as the Middle East. So it makes sense that they're going to grab some Muslims along the way there who bite into the propaganda.
Right. However, I mean, the ISIS pitch works really well in a place like, Xinjiang, the Uyghur Xinjiang, because, historically they've been oppressed and they've been trying to make their own thing for a long time. They also happen to be Sunni Muslim, so like the pitch is pretty easy to people who are receptive to that kind of nonsense.
Well, that's how the ISIS pitch, that's how the ISIS, the Al-Qaeda pitch works. They target it. It started off in Arab countries, and one of the main messages was not only the religious fundamental aspects, but about the Sykes-Picot, like ISIS. How many times have they quoted Sykes-Picot or redrawing the lines of Sykes-Picot as one of their main reasons for what they were doing, for the atrocities that they were doing? Now, when that wasn't enough, when they weren't able to fill their ranks with enough Arab fighters to be successful or to form a caliphate, that's when the propaganda started going out to the Soviet bloc states, the former Soviet bloc states that had a Muslim presence or a Muslim identity within it. That's why you see so many ISIS commanders who are either Georgian or Chechnyan, or in this case there's
Uyghurs, right?
Uyghurs. I'm not sure if there's any ISIS commanders that are Uyghurs, but I do know that there have been some that have been joined there. But then again, ISIS is the people have been recruited from ISIS and these Al-Qaeda groups from all over the world, including America, including Britain, including France,
all over the world, right?
Oh my God! There's a side note. There was a story about I think he was a Greek Muslim. I forget what country he came from. He was from Europe, but Turkey trapped him within the border fence between Turkey and Greece.
They trapped him?
Yeah, they just closed the gate because they didn't want to deal with them. It was... Sirens are coming. Take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important to note, especially from the context of this discussion about Uyghurs, is that because you've been hearing a lot of like negative press, I think, definitely some of it is founded. There have been, Uyghurs who have joined ISIS and different, Islamic extremist groups. They're not an exception to that rule. There's going to be extremists in every religion. But also within China, there have been a lot of clashes there. One thing that I found interesting is that there's a lot of like Uyghurs who are like very skilled at crafting knives. Like that's their trade. They make knives. And as a part of their ethnic heritage, they carry knives, right? They carry knives around. It's like a sign of masculinity or something like that. It's they're trying to compensate for something. I don't know. Who knows? But China's really worried about that because they're like, hey, these guys are joining ISIS and they walking around with knives and shit like that. Like, we got to crack down on them, right? So I think, China's using this play, and it's a really interesting and problematic pitch that they're saying, hey, listen, the U.S., UK, all the Western world, is fighting this war on terrorism, and, they're dropping bombs on civilians, and they're, supporting, rebel groups, and they're trying to overthrow governments and all that stuff. All we're doing is trying to educate them and, put them in these job vocation training programs and make them like, productive members of Chinese society, and it's an interesting play because, when as an American or, someone, representative of the American government, they can point their fingers and say, hey, that's an atrocity. You shouldn't be doing these fucked up things to these people. And then China turns around and says, well, at least we're not bombing random, villages and shit. We're not like, going into a sovereign state and, completely upending their entire way of life with drones.
when China has the moral high ground on you, it's pretty bad.
It's problematic.
It's problematic.
It's very problematic because for on the face of it, if you were just to read it that way, right, without looking into like kind of the background and the history, you'd be like, before these leaks came out, you might question whether or not it's necessarily a bad thing to put a bunch of people in some vocational trainings to try to like right them. And that's that. I don't want to get too far ahead. Maybe we can take a quick break, but that's where I'm at.
So this episode is sponsored by Blue Chew. Guys, remember the days when you were always ready to go? I sure do. Now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up, BlueChew.com. That's blue like the color blue. Blue Chew brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved active ingredient as Viagra and Cialis. You can take them anytime, day or night, even on a full stomach, and since they're chewable, they work up to twice as fast as a pill. So you can be ready whenever that opportunity arises. If you could benefit from more confidence where it counts, Blue Chew is the fast and easy way to enhance your performance. Blue Chew is prescribed online by licensed physicians, so you don't have to go to the doctor's office or wait in line at the pharmacy, and it ships right to your door in a discreet package. They're made in the USA, and since Blue Chew prepares and ships direct, they're cheaper than a pharmacy. And best of all, there's no more awkwardness. All right. Blue Chew. Right now, we got a special deal for our listeners. Visit BlueChew.com and get your first shipment free when you use our special promo code BRO. That's B-R-O. Just pay $5 shipping. Again, that's B-L-U-E Chew.com. Promo code BRO to try it free. And Blue Chew is the better, cheaper, faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast.
Thanks, Blue Chew.
Thank you, Blue Chew. So, it's an interesting story because it's kind of being used right now. We were talking about how China can claim moral high ground on some areas, and the U.S. can claim moral high ground in some areas. Like, the U.S. may be an empire and may do some pretty fucked up things to other countries, but as much as we complain, I'm pretty happy being an American and living in the U.S. Yeah. I'll be completely honest, and I'd rather live here than anywhere else in the world. And I love America. The problem with China is that they may not have a completely fucked up foreign policy like we do. However, they have a fucked up domestic policy.
That's right.
That includes having social credit scores and, just shamelessly putting people in the vocational re-education camps that sound a lot like concentration camps to most people. That's what kind of pops up in my mind,
right?
Where they have things including scores and all these kind of weird, crazy things.
Dude, it's Orwellian, man.
It's very Orwellian, and I guess they're trying to get the Muslim out of them or something like that.
That's exactly what they're doing. So that kind of brings us to those leaked documents. But before we get specifically into those documents, I just want to give you lay of the land on these camps. So they built a bunch of these massive camps. And right now, the estimation is about 1 million Uyghurs are detained in these vocational training centers. So if you remember back from when I was talking about their population, there's only about 11 million of them that are living in that area. So that's almost 1 in 10 of all Uyghurs are in one of these vocational training camps, right? And initially they said they set these up to stamp out these hardline groups and train people up and give them these skills, right? But if you look at the list of names of Uyghurs who have been interred in these camps, it's everybody.
They sound like you. They sound like Danny Abdel-Jabbar.
Yeah, I'd probably end up on their fucking list too. So it's literally anybody, just students, party officials, farmers, random people that have no connections or crazy Islamic extremism in them, and the way that they're doing this is nuts, dude. They're using technology and computers and AI to predict lists of terrorists and suspected terrorists, and it's really problematic because some of the ways that they're doing that is just it doesn't make any sense, right? So the system, I'm kind of skipping ahead here a little bit, but the system that they use, it's called the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, or IJOP, whatever. It's owned by a state-owned military contractor, basically. And what it does is it flags the names of people who are considered suspicious for behavior that includes anything from leaving the country, asking people to pray, using phone apps like WhatsApp or whatever that can't be monitored by the government. Making phone calls to someone outside of China is another criteria. There's a list of the most... I wish I actually pulled this up, but there was one article I was reading through the list of some of the criteria that were landing you into one of these camps, and it's just some of the most ridiculous shit. And what's crazy about this is that if you're suspected, you get called in for questioning, right? And then you get put through the system, right? And it ranges anywhere from house arrest to these detention centers. And there's a bunch of different monitoring systems. But basically, once you end up inside, you're fucked. There's no way out. They will find something for you to admit that you did wrong. And then you will basically forcing you to admit a crime.
Well, wait, hold on one second. So I'm trying to find the criteria because I want to. That sounds super interesting. I typed in Uighur camp into Google, and the first thing that pops up is Uighur camps organs, Uighur camps organ harvesting.
Yes.
Uighur camps video.
Yes, dude. There's a lot. From this, there was a leaked document, right? And it stipulates a bunch of random shit. One of the interesting ones is what you're speaking about. So they're really, really interested in DNA, right? They really want to harvest. I haven't heard confirmed reports about harvesting organs, but I wouldn't put it past them. But they definitely want to they force you to take DNA samples because they're trying to work out this legal argument that you're not indigenous, right? And therefore you don't have those indigenous people's protections. And so they're using that as a way to oppress these people. But also, they're doing a lot of crazy shit within these their prisons, dude. They use watchtowers to prevent escapes. They have double locked doors, video surveillance literally everywhere, even in the bathrooms. They regiment every aspect of their lives, right? So if you have a particular class that you go to, you have to sit in a particular seat, you have to use the bathroom at specific times, you only get 2 minutes to go to the bathroom. If you do something wrong or show up late, tase you, which is fucked up. And then I was watching this one video where like they're trained to respond, "Thank you, teacher. I won't do it again," which is fucked up. And there was this one like,
it sounds like they're just learning discipline.
Dude, I mean, no, that's torture, man. They basically set up a system in there that scores them on a number of different things. And they start with like, how well do you speak Mandarin, like Chinese? How well can you memorize particular Chinese ideologies? And then how well do you adhere to strict rules on literally everything, like down to taking a bath, like how often and how frequently you take a shower, and like how often and frequently you use the toilet. And one of these documents was of the surveillance, you know, one of the lines that came out of it was, it said, this is to prevent problems before they happen. Let me try and see one of these quotes here. So the foreign ministry spokesperson, Gang Shuang, said about this, about the camps, they said that measures are taken in a timely manner that Xinjiang, and then there's an ellipses here, ... has not been seen. Xinjiang has not seen a single terrorist incident for 3 years. So basically what they're saying is, hey, we did this thing. We put a bunch of people in camps, and guess what? No terrorism for 3 years. It worked. Like, what the fuck is this? Is this Minority Report? Like, they're literally trying to say, like, trying to make the argument that because we have these camps, there are no terrorist incidents.
It kind of sounds like it's like saying, oh, well, since we've been in the Middle East, there hasn't really been that many terrorist attacks in the U.S.
You know what? Since we started, Operation Iraqi Freedom, there hasn't been another 9/11 since.
There hasn't been a terrorist attack at the scale of 9/11 since.
Right. I mean,
there's been plenty of terrorist attacks in the U.S.
Right. I'm just saying. I'm exaggerating a bit here, but I mean, I guess the point here is that they're using a lot of different technology to swoop up a bunch of people. In one instance, they picked up 15,000 people in one day. Like, they detained 15,000 people in a single day. Like, that's on the number of people that are being detained, and the rate at which they're being detained is on par with the Holocaust. Like, and that's just objective.
That's crazy. I'm looking at the list right now, some of the criteria. So one of them is extreme thoughts, praying and opposing pornography. Praying and opposing pornography? Am I reading that correctly? It just says extreme thoughts, praying, and usually they contradict each other, right?
Right. Praying and pornography. Unless your God is pornography.
Okay. Are they saying that if you don't oppose pornography, then you're put in a camp?
I guess I'm off their list, right?
Because that would mean that everyone would have to go into a camp, right?
Yeah.
There's some real words. Extends abroad.
If you have a long beard, you're in.
If you have a long beard, you're in.
If you wear a hijab, you're in. Oh, this is another interesting part that's like super offensive for Muslims. They actually... they've been tearing down a bunch of mosques, by the way, which is fucked up in and of itself. But in mosques, they're forced, like part of the Muslim religion, Islam. And I don't know a ton, but I do know that they don't like idolatry, right? That's why you don't see pictures of Muhammad anywhere, right? And why they get so incensed by it. But in these Uyghur mosques, the Chinese government forces them to have and display pictures of Xi Jinping.
I thought you were going to say Mao, but yeah, Xi Jinping is the worst.
Like, so basically they're all praying.
Is it Pooh?
Yeah, to Winnie the Pooh.
By the way, they censored Winnie the Pooh because it looks like him.
Right, because somebody made a meme about it and they didn't like it. What a baby.
China's a bully state. It's a bully state that it's no secret that if China could do the things that the United States could, they would definitely have the same type of foreign policy, but they don't have the actual power to do it because, as we went over a an entire episode comparing the U.S. military and the Chinese military, and China's a paper tiger. Like the U.S. would destroy China in a war. Like it's not even close. And, people talk about China as a new grave threat, and, maybe they are in the future. But as of right now, and like as far as military I don't know why I'm even twisting it to this subject, but I think it's some interesting context. That China is a bully state, and they commit all these. They do have. There's a lot wrong with China, and we've had different opinions and different takes on things like the trade wars, which, we had a whole thing on tariffs, and I think we kind of came to an agreement that tariffs ultimately are not good because it's a form of welfare. At least that was my take, that tariffs could be a form of welfare to prop up businesses that wouldn't ultimately succeed.
And my take on tariffs is just I don't want to pay for them.
Ridiculous. But it also the cost is passed on to the consumer as well. However, it doesn't completely whitewash a lot of the really bad things that China does, and a lot of the really kind of fucked up things they do in their foreign policy as well. Besides treat Uighurs like animals, as far as the predatory lending that they do, as far as they act kind of like a European. Well, I mean, they do the exact same thing as European countries. They get countries into massive debt. And they basically are just kind of users and borrowers and
usurers, right?
It's
and yeah, honestly, there's also a bit of a geopolitical play here too, right? This isn't just China is communist and secular and they don't like Muslims. Like that's definitely part of it, but there's also like a big geopolitical implication here. So Xinjiang, the autonomous region of Xinjiang, is massive. It's in the northwest of China. It's like all the way there. It's bigger than Germany, it's bigger than a lot of different countries. So it's a massive, massive area. It's very rich in resources. I think something like a third of their mineral and coal deposits are there. So obviously it makes sense for them from a natural resource perspective to make sure that they can quell any, uprisings or like hostilities in that region. But more importantly, and this is kind of related to your claims about what they do, kind of abroad, is that as we've discussed on previous episodes, China's doing what's called the Belt Road Initiative, right? And so what that is, just in a nutshell for those who aren't in the know, China's trying to build a new Silk Road, right? Like a land bridge. I know you don't like that word, Henry. A land bridge. They're trying to build a road.
You mean a road?
Yeah, literally a road. They're trying to build a road from like China straight through like Central Asia onwards into Europe, right? Why? Because it takes a long time, and it's cost and resource intensive to get something from China, which they make everything, all around like the Indian Ocean and up through the Straits of Hormuz and other areas like that. So what they're trying to do is just like, all right, fuck it, we're just going to drive across the road. But in order to do that, they have to drive through other countries, right? Places like Afghanistan and places like, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, places like this. And these are all places that, I don't want to bash on them or anything like that, but they're not necessarily on in terms of like first world country status. They're not quite there. So what China does is they go into these countries and they say, hey, we'll lend you a ton of money and we'll give you our expertise to help us build this road, and it'll bring your country prosperity because a bunch, the Silk Road was legit. Any country or any city, any state that was along the Silk Road prospered because of the trade, right? So that's the pitch that they give them, but then they do it at predatory lending rates, right? And if you default on it, they basically say, okay, cool, we're going to take this over now, right? And so they're building this road between China and, basically the West. And Xinjiang is right in the way of that, right? It's right on that northwest border where they plan most of their roads to go through. So, this is really important. Another interesting point is that, we're talking about in a pretty popular episode for Kashmir, and its implications of having a land bridge into, areas like India. For the same reasons, they have this vested interest in making sure that they have like a quiet, docile, area where they can do this type of trade and pull this stunt off. So there definitely are, like, in addition to the ethnic minority question, in addition to the religious question, and more broadly their question on fighting global terrorism, or at least domestic terrorism, there's also the huge geopolitical implications, for silencing Uyghurs that are the minority in that Xinjiang province.
Yeah, it's important to take note that the value of assets go significantly down, like assets like pipelines and roads and things that connect, things that connect other countries to other countries that either ship or transport goods or items or commodities. They go significantly down when that area is under some type of strife or if it's dangerous, because there's always a risk that road can be destroyed or that pipeline can be destroyed. So there's a vested interest in China having all those people, not, docile and either integrated into Chinese, normal society or what they would normally,
too afraid to do anything about it,
or are afraid to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't know how it's going to work out in the future, though. Are Uyghurs going to either rise up or whatever? It sounds like, the U.S. Congress has condemned it. The United States is largely condemning it. Donald Trump is condemning it. I think the article, my short-term memory is so terrible right now. But, one of the things that interested me about this was that, there was a couple of takes on how, Trump could possibly use this to kind of beat China over the head with it, to gain leverage in the trade war. The reason why the U.S. condemns China right now and why they're condemning China right now is because they're seen as geopolitical rivals, and I think there's a huge camp. If you ask most foreign policy hacks or people who are at these think tanks of who's the biggest geopolitical rival, none of them are realistically saying Iran is a geopolitical rival. None of them are really even saying that Russia is a really geopolitical rival. All of them are saying that China is a geopolitical rival of the future because they're able to do things like manufacture at a humongous rate and push out products and push out finished goods to the rest of the world at a very low price.
Yeah, their sphere of influence extends way beyond their borders.
The threat to Russia to the United States is if the United States and Russia got into a war, and that threat is just the threat of a nuclear holocaust, which would be bad for both countries. So they kind of deter each other. The reason why the U.S. is really aggressive on Russia is because the Russians will sometimes oppose U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, whether that be in Ukraine or Ukraine's not in the Middle East, but whether that be, they'll oppose U.S. foreign policy, whether that will be in Ukraine or places like Syria. So the U.S. kind of gets its anti-Russian sentiment from moves like that. With China, they actually see, China as a significant threat because of the growing economy, not necessarily a military threat, at least right now. But I think that's why they're condemning it. That's why it's kind of universally being condemned from Democrat to Republican, and also because it's an easy thing to condemn. Like, you'd have to be blind and dumb not to condemn something like that. It's immoral and bad, and it should be condemned. But, you got to look at it at a political lens, because most U.S. politicians are only going to universally or bipartisan. It's going to be a bipartisan agreement, usually, if it's something that's safe and easy to go against, which it is and which it should be. But, I wish that our politicians would condemn other civil rights atrocity or human rights, really bad human rights acts across the world that they don't really touch because they're scared to.
And also because there's no political gain in them.
Yeah, unless they can get some political gain in them. But yeah, it's an interesting story, and it's an interesting context as far as who the Uyghurs are. I didn't really know that they were kind of a brand. I've always thought that before this podcast, I always thought that they were just a ethnic group.
Yeah, it's a troubling thing, and especially with these DNA tests that China's really pushing for. There's people on one side that say, hey, let's go ahead and do it to prove who we are, and then there's people on the other side that are like, well, what if they find out that we're we're not one cohesive unit, and then we don't get any protections. And the similar fears are on the Chinese side as well, right? So on the one hand, they're saying, hey, we're going to disprove that you're a thing. On the other hand, they're saying, well, what if you are a thing? So it's pretty convoluted, man.
Speaking of China, so what's your take on these protests in Hong Kong?
Yeah, man. I mean, I don't think we've done like a really extensive, background on that, and I haven't caught up to date. But I know that finally the U.S. is backing the protesters there now, and I know that this shit has been going on for a really long time. They oust their like leadership there. I think I read not too long ago.
Yeah, so basically the U.S. is starting to publicly back them and starting to publicly support them. And typically when it happens, it kind of like hijacks or subverts the movements that actually do spring up organically. It's what happens with Iran. It's a double-edged
sword because on the one hand, it affirms to the protesters that, yeah, like, hey, people in the world, specifically the United States of America, supports our cause, so it emboldens them. It gives them support in that way. But at the same time, like you said, it does kind of muddy the water a little bit because then it's like inauthentic in that same regard.
Well, there has been Iranian protests over the past couple of weeks, and by all accounts, they seem like they seemed like they were organic protests against the government there,
right? Which
is not a good government. However, when the U.S. goes and starts backing them or starts publicly supporting them, it usually subverts the entire movement in the first place, right? Because no one wants to be seen as like, people don't realize is that, places like Iran,
specifically Iran,
countries like Iran, which may have been one of the greatest victims of a U.S. coup that took place in 1953,
right?
Through Kermit Roosevelt, and who is Theodore Roosevelt's grandson. They went and they paid people to protest until the government was forced, until the military performed a coup on the president of Iran. So they effectively paid people and they started a false flag rebellion. Right. This is something that the CIA has admitted. Like they said, yeah, we did do it.
Yep.
We did overthrow the Iranian. we paid a bunch of people to act like they were anti-Mossadegh supporters.
Kermit bought newspapers, like imagine like the New York Times, like the Times of Tehran. He bought that, and then they would print fake news.
Well, that's what the globalists are doing with the WP and the NYT.
Yeah. I got the documents right here.
We're gonna harvest. This actually segues into something that's interesting because apparently, allegedly, so a report came out that Iran considered attacking U.S. bases in the Middle East. Attacks were said to be discussed before the Yemen drone strike on Saudi Arabia. So the drone strike that they're referring to is the one that took place in Saudi Aramco, on the oil processing facility that was hit in the back. And we were talking about the IPO last week, how the evaluation of Saudi Aramco, they were at one time expecting it to evaluate it at $2 trillion, and now it's at $1.7 trillion, which is a huge blow, which is a lot of money. It was $300 billion under the value that they wanted, and you would think it's the most profitable company in the world. The amount of oil that it exports is just insane, and they have a huge thirsty market in these Asian countries like China, Japan, South Korea. Their number one trading partners. It's not really the U.S. And the value is significantly lower than anyone really expected, at least what they expected about a year ago, or at least when Mohammed bin Salman became the crown prince and really started spearheading that government. And the reasons like having a oil processing facility at risk is a reason why the IPO was lower than expected. It's not the only reason. Another big reason is because no one wants to put foreign capital into a country that
is doing a war in Yemen.
They can just do it. They can either do a war in Yemen, but just has such poor judgment decisions, as in Mohammed bin Salman throwing basically a bunch of princes and a bunch of people within the Saudi government in the Ritz-Carlton, and effectively kind of purging out a lot of his enemies for not doing what he wanted them to do economically, or not. One of them was not agreeing to purchase IPOs of Saudi, shares of Saudi Aramco, was apparently one of the reasons. So it's kind of it's interesting that the U.S. would say that Iran considered attacking a U.S. base. First of all, because Iran would not. It's enough. All right, let me rephrase this, because I think I'm not explaining it the right way. It's enough for Iran to be able to reach Saudi Arabia.
Right.
It's enough for Iran to be able to hit a Saudi processing facility with a missile, with a cruise missile, or either through a proxy in Yemen, through like a Houthi proxy. It's enough for them to have some sort of leverage. They wouldn't need to even consider attacking a U.S. base. The red line, it's pretty clear the red line that would cause the U.S., or at least cause Donald Trump, to engage in a military strike against Iranian targets would be a dead American soldier.
Right.
It's like an absolute clear-cut line. Mm-hmm. If there's any dead American soldier from either from Iran or some closely affiliated Iranian proxy, there will be a significant case for war with Iran.
Yeah, and I think
Iran doesn't want that. Iran does not. They don't. They're not to think the government is self-destructive
right.
is utterly without context.
Right.
They have a good gig going on. They have. Almost complete authoritarian rule over that country. They're not going to ruin it. They're going to oppose U.S. foreign policy, but they're not going to push the limits that far. They're going to test the boundaries. Like, all right, if the U.S. if the UK seizes a tanker, Iran's going to seize a tanker. If they can reach a Saudi target, they're gonna maybe take a hit at a Saudi target, but they're not going to cross the red line of killing a U.S. troop.
And
it would
this
just
is
be
specifically
finished.
This is specifically pointed out in like the Reuters reporting. The one article that I saw, which basically it's an account from some folks, some top Iranian military officials that met in May, and basically 3 people who were familiar with the meetings and a 4th close to Iran's decision making. Basically, they reported to Reuters that they had this meeting and they were like, we got to figure out something to do, basically to strike back at the United States for putting on all these sanctions. One of them is quoted as saying, and this is all allegedly, of course, saying it's time to take out our swords and teach them a lesson. It was one of their commanders of the Revolutionary Guard that said that. But Khomeini, he stopped short of like actually hitting the U.S. Like you said, they're not stupid. The strict conditions, they say that according to this report, Ayatollah Khomeini, he approved the operation to hit Aramco, but the conditions were that the forces have to avoid hitting any civilians or any Americans, right? And so, like, here's a good target, just hit a oil facility. There's probably not any Americans there,
And it would make sense for them to do that because I guess in a position they're in right now, they can't be sanctioned any more than they are, and they know that the people who are grasping reality within the Pentagon
right.
understand the tremendous cost of human life it would be if the U.S. went to war with Iran.
Right.
So they kind of understand that they at the very least have some leverage. They don't realistically think that there's going to be a land invasion, which would be pretty much impossible within Iran.
Right.
So
they made a calculated decision. They made a calculated.
I think they made a calculated decision to go after that.
And this again, I just want to point
facility.
out that this is uncorroborated. Right. This is an account, a second or a third-hand account, just like the Republican folks say about the impeachment inquiry. Right. Still uncorroborated, and folks in Iran are completely denying this, of course. So, I think it's an interesting leak, but we still don't know, right? I think it definitely lends some credence to the theory that Iran did the Aramco strike. We still don't know all of the details. The likelihood is that maybe they did use Houthi proxies, because they took responsibility for it, right? So yeah, it's some interesting context. I don't want to go so far as to say that this is actually what happened, but it's definitely interesting, and it makes sense.
I kind of think they did do it, and it's like a lot of people who I think are sympathetic, who are on that libertarian or who oppose a lot of U.S. foreign policy, are like, Iran didn't do it, and they're kind of completely whitewashing them from doing it. I think they did do it. I really think they did do it. I think they did do it with the Houthis, and it was a joint operation with drones as well as a cruise missile. I think it makes sense, and I honestly think that the Iranians are backing the Houthis a lot more than I initially expected, or I initially thought probably 6 months ago. I still don't think there is as big a connection as the Pentagon says that there is, but I think the connection is. I think they're funding them more so than I thought they were, like about 6-7 months ago. Like, my mind has kind of shifted. They definitely have been sending a lot more guns and money than I thought they were. The Houthis recently just gave this happened a while ago, but the Houthis just sent I think it was like $250,000 over to Hezbollah,
in Lebanon.
In Lebanon. And of course, it said death to the U.S., death to Israel,
with love, Ayatollah
just
Khomeini.
the worst PR in the world. With love to Allah, just like the worst PR in the world. Mm-hmm. The Houthis are terrible at any type of good PR moves. No one's gonna sympathize with you when you're chanting that. At least in the people that you need to gain sympathy with are not gonna support. They're not gonna support you. However, it almost sounds like a kind of a way to funnel money into Hezbollah through Yemen. I don't know. I can't prove this at all, but it just sounds like a funky way to get money over to Hezbollah from Iran.
Money laundering is an interesting game,
It's money laundering is an interesting game, and I'm sure that you could probably find some interesting things. Iran is definitely the big supporter of Hezbollah within Lebanon. The big financial backer, along with religious donations as well. Religious donations fund a lot of these organizations as well, right? Especially the Shia ones. That all the religious ones have their donors, but especially Hezbollah, who's kind of seen as. I think Hezbollah is kind of seen as a good faith actor within a lot of Arab nationalist countries as well as Shiite minorities. It's kind of my perspective on them, because they do things like oppose Israel, and they fight in Syria. Mm-hmm. So I think they do kind of quander up a lot of those small donations. But
independent donations like that to religions also funded the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah. So this is nothing new.
Well, people. It's just It's just the way the world works. Religion and state are the biggest funders of stuff. Yeah,
501c3s.
Yeah. So, all right. Speaking of leaked documents, because since we're we're mainly talking about leaked stuff. So there was another leaked report, and we've talked about this so many times in this podcast. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it was interesting that this was leaked. So the OPCW accused of manipulating Syrian chemical attack report. I'm reading this right from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, who's been on the show. He is basically what happened was that there was a alleged gas attack in Douma in Syria in April of last year, and the eyewitness reports said that they came from the air, and after further investigation, a lot of people believe that that was inaccurate and that it came from a cylinder on the surface, and that the eyewitness accounts were fabrications. Some of those accusations go as far as accusing the White Helmets of making everything up. The White Helmet leader, or the founder of the White Helmets, was recently suspiciously thrown out of a window.
He fell out of a window.
Right. straight out like Braveheart. You ever see Braveheart?
Yeah, dude.
You know the scene where the father throws out the son's lover out the window?
Yeah.
He's like, "What would you deal with this specific situation?" And he throws him out the window. Something like that probably happened to this guy. However, back to the leaks. So apparently a leaker from the OPCW said that the initial reports were redacted to make him seem a lot more to intentionally point the fingers at the Syrian army, and these considered things like messing up with the timeline of when it happened, not including the time of when the inspections took place after the alleged attack took place. So there's a lot of all shady stuff. This was actually reported on or at MIT. I don't know, a physicist or MIT smart guy, a guy who deals with this, I guess nuclear physicist, I'm not sure. Ted Postal, he's a smart man with a genius title. He was right. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what type of science he does, but he does science at MIT. He's an authority.
He does science.
Do you know who else went to MIT?
Who?
Iran has a bomb in 6 months. The guy who's being indicted right now for corruption. He was saying that it was unlikely that the Syrian army did it. The Syrian Air Force was the culprits of this, and that it most likely came from the ground. And this attack in Duma, the one that happened in 2018. Provoked, retaliation from the U.S., France, and Britain. It seems like it, and I used to be way more adamant about my claims about the Syrian gas attacks being complete bullshit and false flags. And I've tried to be objective on this because I've looked at the first attack a lot more, the Ghouta gas attack that took place in 2013. That was the one that Obama's thin red line. And after looking at that further, I find it I have questions on both sides now. Right. About what exactly happened with those attacks. I used to just say that Al-Qaeda did it or the Free Syrian Army did it. Now I don't think the answer is that simple. So I don't have a conclusion yet. However, on this one, I think it's complete horse shit, and it was a false flag that the Syrians had nothing to do with this attack at all. Yeah. So it further
complicates things.
But it also further kind of makes me go back to my original point. Okay, so if this one was bullshit, then all it makes it way more likely that the Ghouta ones were bullshit. And the Ghouta gas attacks was, the gas attack that killed a lot more people. That killed thousands of people. So it further complicates things. It's really hard to know what's going on when you're not on the ground and you're dealing with a million different eyewitness accounts that contradict each other. Right. It's hard for people on the internet to figure all this out. The only things that you can really do are kind of just leak out the corruption and the mishandling of the reports and kind of spell out when there's an official narrative and when agencies are cherry picking information to make it seem like one culprit did it. And this is kind of exactly what you're getting right now with this leaked OPCW report. Yeah. So we've talked about this a bunch. I would just encourage to listen to some other podcasts that we've done about Syria. For sure. Will open up your eyes. Richard Black, who's been on the show.
Senator Richard Black, I should say.
State Senator Richard Black, who's been on the show. he flat out says that, he was a prosecutor and a JAG attorney. He flat out says that all these are bullshit. All these gas attacks are complete bullshit, that they're all done by Al-Qaeda affiliates. He went there, he was there in Syria. Right. So I tend
He's
to
got a leg up on us. Yeah.
I tend to listen to him on a lot of stuff. By the way, listen to that podcast. I think it's one of our, it's a very explosive interview with State Senator Richard Black, who went to Syria and met Bashar al-Assad and had a lot of eyewitness accounts of what took place there. So I would encourage people to listen to that podcast because it's really interesting. It's on YouTube as well, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to start launching our YouTube channel and putting more content on it soon. We're just being lazy assholes for now because, I don't know, you and I for the remainder of the year are fucking busy as fuck with stuff. But next year, end of December, things are going to...
Next decade,
our schedules will lighten up to do more of the YouTube stuff. But do you have anything else to say about the Syrian gas attacks? Going once, going twice.
No.
What do you think about the Syrian gas? Hey, great topics for Thanksgiving today. Right. If you're listening to this on your way to your family's house, here are 3 topics that you should bring up
to totally
for your Thanksgiving day, your Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Topic number 1: Syrian gas attacks. Talk about that. Talk about false flag attacks. All about that. Should bring up some great dinner conversation. My girlfriend's dad asked me about Assad once. He's like, "So, did Assad gas his own people?" And he was with his friends, and I was like, "Well, it's a complicated situation." Another great topic for Thanksgiving would be who killed Jesus.
Will be Pontius Pilate for 900.
Another great topic for Thanksgiving. Let's see. Talk about the Federal Reserve. That should be a good one.
Talk about cryptocurrency and how that's going to save our lives.
Here. Another topic for Thanksgiving, the Rothschilds.
The Bilderbergs.
What are some other good Thanksgiving topics for the table, for some good dinner?
I mean, I know of a bunch of topics, but if I were to predict...
That are like interesting civil debate topics for Thanksgiving.
If I were to predict what the Thanksgiving topics are going to be, it's definitely going to be around impeachment, 100%, right?
Oh, I think that...
100%.
The liberals... the liberals, or the Communist Party of America.
Right.
It's gonna be a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of like, everyone has that kind of like archetype that they like to speak about, that conservative uncle who they disagree with.
Right.
At least like from the left, you always hear this, like,
right.
"Oh, Thanksgiving, it got to be around my conservative Uncle Bill. He's a real boomer. He's a real Republican who voted for Bush and loved these wars.
Right.
Complete war hawk." And then they're like, "We should actually." He's probably not even going to want to go to war with Russia. What a boomer! You're going to get a lot of that probably. Most conversations are going to be about probably impeachment.
Yeah,
and then so. the families that like to go a little deeper into some real edgy territory are going to talk about Epstein.
Yep.
That's juicy.
Yep.
I mean, I apologize for saying that. I don't think you should use the word juicy on that. It's a sick, disgusting story.
Right.
But it's an interesting topic because it is sick and disgusting. The more you learn about it. ABC, here's something I would bring up to your Thanksgiving. ABC, and I'm sure a lot of you heard, had the story covered 3 years ago, and their producers made them shut the story down. There was a hot mic with an ABC reporter who was talking about how she had all this evidence, and she had all these stories, and she had witnesses, she had people who were going to testify. She had all these girls coming to her about Epstein being a prolific pedophile, and the producers made her cut the story. it was caught on a hot mic of her venting it while she was talking to a producer. But I mean, apparently they say that it came from the top down. But these news organizations are all ran from the top down. You know, reporters, I don't think at these major networks are given very much liberty to reporting on things that are not on the entertainment agenda.
Right.
But it's a
if you're going to hate on the mainstream media, hate on the corporation itself, not on the individual reporters.
Unless they're hack jobs.
Yeah, that's possible too. But you got to take them one at a time.
You could hate on some individual reporters.
Yeah, you got to take them one at a time.
I'll give you a reporter on the left to hate and a reporter on the right that I hate. I hate Rachel Maddow and I hate Sean Hannity.
There you go.
Whoa, where do you put me politically? What a weird person. All right, I have another funny story to bring up during Thanksgiving. It's about Rick Perry.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, this is a good one to close on.
Hilarious.
I think, yeah.
And I'm just reading off antiwar.com right now, off interesting, funny stories, and the way the title of this just made me laugh. So whoever wrote this, if it's Dave DeCamp and you're listening, it's hilarious. It's Energy Secretary Rick Perry said in an interview that he told President Donald Trump that he was God's chosen one.
Oh man.
And then it links to a USA Today article. God's used imperfect people all through history. Perry shares why he thinks Trump is the chosen one. And let me just read the first paragraph. Energy Secretary Rick Perry said in an interview that he told President Donald Trump that he was God's chosen one to lead the United States, just as he chose the kings to lead Israel in the Old Testament. Perry, who will reportedly soon be leaving the cabinet, explained that nothing in the universe is accidental and that God is still very active in the details of the day-to-day lives of government.
Wow.
Barack Obama didn't get to be the president of the United States without being ordained by God. Neither did Donald Trump, he said in a Fox News interview that aired Sunday, adding that God has used individuals who aren't perfect all through history. King David wasn't perfect. Saul wasn't perfect. Solomon wasn't perfect. And I actually gave the president a little one-pager on those Old Testament kings about a month ago, Perry said.
I'm sure he read it.
I don't know if that was an Onion article or not. That bleeds into the line of like, is that parody or not? Because if that was written on the Onion or if it was written on Clickhole, I would find it just as funny. Like that. The fact that that's true, and he said that is just. It's just really funny. It's just hilarious. If you can't find the humor in that.
Right. So when you're sitting at your dinner table today and you're eating your Thanksgiving turkey, right before that tryptophan-induced coma hits, you just got to lay this bomb on them. Trump is God's chosen one.
Just, oh, God. Like, that's just kind of like my reaction. Like, oh, God. It's almost endearing.
Yeah.
Like, I almost find that endearing.
Cute, you know?
It's endearing. Like, in the interview, he said, God, just as he chose the kings to lead Israel in the Old Testament. Oh.
Yeah.
Gotta love some good comedy.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else? We have some other, oh, yeah. Here's a sad, we're going to lead on a sad note. Julian Assange is apparently in really bad health. So there's been an open letter from a bunch of doctors just talking about like the really poor health that he's in. And it's easy to see when you look at pictures of him, the guy looks like he's aged about 20 years in a matter of 2 years or so. When he came out of the embassy, it was shocking. When he came with his long hair and he didn't look like he was eating. It sounds like he's close to dying, and I hope that it's really sad.
Yeah,
that guy has been through hell. But
things to be thankful for.
Things to be thankful for. Fuck. Why did we have to end on a depressing note?
I don't know. I didn't intend to.
We were having fun before. All right. Any last words about Thanksgiving or holiday spirits? Is there anything that we're supposed to plug?
I don't know about any plugs, but just my call is like, be safe. If you're gonna drink, don't drive. The usual shit.
Stay away from alcohol, and I don't know where that was going. Yeah, be safe. Enjoy your holidays. Watch football.
Be American.
Be American for once. All right. Peace.
Whatever happened to Limp Bizkit?
Limp Bizkit is... I don't know. Let's type it in real quick. What happened to Limp Bizkit?
What happened to Limp Bizkit?
Well, there's a forum on it immediately. What the heck happened to Limp Bizkit? Wow!
Well, in March 2019, Limp Bizkit's recent live return. What comes next for Fred Durst, Wes Borland, and Sam Rivers, John Otto, and DJ Lethal? Jesus.
So it seems like he's in good health.
Yeah, seems like it.